There is a read happening on you right now, in rooms you've already walked out of, and you weren't watching for it. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is happening in the pause before you speak, in the way you sit down at a table, in the 2 seconds after someone disagrees with you. You keep missing it because you learned attraction as a young man, and young attraction runs on a completely different set of rules than the ones operating on you now. Back then it was about being noticed. Now it is about being read. Nobody tells you the test changes. Nobody sits you down and says the thing she is checking for at 50 is not the thing she checked for at 25. So you keep performing an old test while she is quietly grading a new one. Tonight I want to show you exactly what that new test is, and more importantly, what you are already doing right now without knowing it, that is either passing it or failing it. By the end of this video, you will not just understand the signal, you will recognize it in your own recent memory, in conversations you thought were unremarkable, and you will know precisely which parts of yourself to protect and which to quietly correct. Picture the last time you walked into a room and tried a little too hard to prove you still had it. Maybe it was a joke that landed just slightly too fast. Maybe it was standing a bit taller, talking a bit louder, laughing a bit sooner than the moment called for. You were not being fake. You were doing what worked for 30 years. In your 20s and 30s, attraction is largely driven by display, energy, humor, physical presence, the sense that you are the most alive person in the room. Researchers who study mate selection describe this as a signaling strategy, meaning a set of behaviors designed to broadcast value quickly before anyone has time to look closer. It works when you are young because there is no track record yet to check the broadcast against. But somewhere past your mid-40s, something shifts in how women evaluate you, and it is not about your energy level dropping. It is about what she is actually looking for changing entirely. She is no longer asking whether you can perform value in a room. She already assumes you have lived enough life to have value or not. What she is asking now is quieter and much harder to fake. Is this a man who is calibrated, meaning does his presence, his tone, and his self-control match the actual weight of the life he has lived? A man who is calibrated does not need the room's approval to feel steady. A man who is still displaying does. Of course, this does not mean charm or humor suddenly stop mattering. They still matter enormously, but they stop being the test. They become the seasoning on top of it. Think about a dinner with people you had just met, where you noticed yourself filling silences a beat too fast. That instinct to fill space was not confidence. It was a leftover habit from a rule book you no longer need. But calibration is not just about how you behave once you're already talking. It starts with something she reads before you even open your mouth. You've probably noticed you don't move like you used to. What you haven't noticed is that this is working in your favor. There is a specific kind of stillness that comes with age, not stiffness, not slowness, but an economy of movement, where you no longer waste motion proving you're comfortable. Psychologists who study nonverbal communication call this behavioral efficiency, which simply means using only the movement necessary to do what you're doing, nothing performative added on top. A 28-year-old man tends to move like he's still auditioning, quick gestures, restless hands, glancing around a room to see who's watching. A man in his 50s who has settled into himself moves like someone who already knows the room noticed him when he walked in, so there's nothing left to prove. Think of a specific scene. You're at a coffee shop waiting for someone, and instead of checking your phone every few seconds or scanning the room anxiously, you simply sit. Hands relaxed on the table, eyes unhurried. That unhurried quality reads, on an unconscious level, as safety. Not boring, safe. There is a difference. Women's brains, particularly in contexts involving long-term partner evaluation, are highly attuned to cues of stability because stability historically predicted whether a partner could be relied on under pressure, not just admired in a good mood. Of course, one calm moment proves nothing on its own. A single instance of stillness could just be tiredness or distraction. The pattern only means something when it holds steady, even when the moment gets slightly uncomfortable, like a lull in conversation nobody rushes to fill. The common mistake here is assuming that because your body isn't as quick or as loud as it once was, it has lost its signal value entirely. So you try to compensate by talking faster or gesturing more to fill that gap. That overcorrection is usually what gives away the insecurity underneath. The way you move buys you the first 10 seconds. The way you talk decides whether she stays past them. There's a version of you that talks fast when a woman goes quiet. That's the version she's testing. When a silence opens up in conversation, particularly an early one, most men experience it as a kind of low-grade emergency, something that needs to be fixed immediately with a joke, a question, or a story. This instinct comes from a very real place. Younger men learn early that energy and quick wit function as a kind of currency, and stopping that flow feels like losing value in real time. But here's what actually happens in her mind during that pause. Silence to her is not empty space. It is a measurement tool. Behavioral scientists sometimes refer to this as a comfort probe, a moment deliberately or instinctively left open to see who fills it and how. A man who rushes to fill it is unconsciously signaling that he needs the conversation to keep moving in order to feel secure. A man who lets it sit for an extra beat, maybe even smiles slightly instead of speaking, signals the opposite, that his sense of self isn't dependent on constant validation from the exchange. Picture a specific moment. You've just said something. She goes quiet for 3 or 4 seconds longer than expected, maybe looking somewhere past you in thought. The fast-talking version of you jumps in to rescue the silence. The grounded version waits, maybe adds a single short line, and lets the moment breathe. Now, you might be thinking, isn't that just about being talkative or not? Some men are naturally more expressive. And sometimes, yes, that's simply personality. But here is the detail that separates a talkative man from an anxious one. It's not how much you talk, it's whether your talking increases specifically in moments of silence or tension, because that increase is what reveals discomfort rather than natural expressiveness. Remember what I told you at the start, that there was one signal most men not only miss, but actively misread. We are getting close to it now. That test has a name, and most men fail it without knowing they were even being graded. She's going to disagree with you or tease you, probably in the first conversation. What you do next is the entire test. This moment is small on the surface, a light joke at your expense, a mild disagreement about something you said, maybe even a gentle correction. Most men treat it as an actual disagreement to be resolved and either get slightly defensive or over-explain their position to make sure she understands they were right. Here is the fork in the road nobody tells you about. When a woman playfully challenges a man, especially early on, she is very rarely testing whether he agrees with her. She is testing his relationship with being challenged at all. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a frame test. A small pressure applied to see whether a person's sense of self bends, breaks, or simply holds. A defensive reaction, even a mild one, signals that his identity depends somewhat on being seen as correct or in control. Calm amusement, a slight smile, a light comeback, no urgency to correct the record, signals the opposite, that his sense of self was never on the table to begin with. Picture the scene precisely. She says something like, "I don't know if I believe that," with a slight smile, testing to see what happens next. One version of you launches into justification, explaining, adding evidence, subtly asking for her approval of your position. The other version simply says something short, maybe agrees she might be right, and lets it go without needing the last word. Of course, context matters here. A genuinely important disagreement about values or facts is different from a playful tease, and confusing the two would be its own mistake. But in these small, early moments, the content of the disagreement rarely matters. What matters is whether you needed to win it. The common mistake most older men make is assuming maturity means explaining yourself well. Often it means not needing to explain yourself at all. But there's one more signal underneath all of this, one most men never even think to manage because they assume it stopped mattering the day they stopped being young. Before you said a single word tonight, she already knew something about you. Here's what it was. Everything we've walked through so far, the stillness, the pacing, the response to being teased, all of it is downstream from one single trait, and it has almost nothing to do with age at all. It has to do with whether your sense of your own worth is settled or whether it is still quietly waiting on the room to confirm it. Researchers who study self-concept sometimes call this contingent self-esteem, meaning your sense of value rises and falls depending on outside approval, versus a more stable form that holds steady regardless of who's in the room. Women, often without consciously naming it, are extraordinarily fast at detecting which version of a man they're sitting across from. It shows up in whether you check for a reaction after a joke. It shows up in whether a compliment makes you visibly relax, as though you needed it. It shows up in whether disagreement threatens you even slightly. None of these are dramatic tells. They're small, almost invisible, but she is built to notice them because across human history, a partner's stability under social pressure was a genuine predictor of reliability, not just charm. Think back to that room from the beginning of this video, the one you walked into trying a little too hard. What she actually noticed wasn't the effort itself. Effort isn't the problem. What she noticed was what the effort revealed, that some part of you still needed the room to hand you your own value back. Of course, no man is perfectly settled all the time. Everyone has moments of needing reassurance. But the pattern she's reading isn't about a single moment. It's about where you return to by default. A man who has done the work of building his own internal footing doesn't stop being fully human. He simply doesn't hand the keys to his self-regard to whoever happens to be standing in front of him. And that, quietly, is the entire signal this video has been circling from the very first sentence. Which brings you back to the question this video opened with, except now you already know the answer. So here is the pattern laid out plainly. It was never really about your voice or your pace or how you handle a silence or how you respond to being teased. Those were simply the places where the real thing kept showing up. The real thing underneath all of it is whether you are a man who needs the room or a man who is simply visiting it. That is a strange kind of relief once you see it, because it means you don't have to manufacture more energy, more jokes, more youth you no longer have. You just have to notice where you're still performing and gently let those places go quiet. You don't need to overanalyze every interaction from here forward, replaying each pause and each glance looking for hidden meaning. That would just be a new version of the same anxiety. You simply need to know, underneath it all, whether you're settled or still seeking, and let that awareness sit with you the next time you walk into a room. I'd genuinely like to know where you landed on this. Think back to the last time you met someone new. Which version of yourself showed up? The one performing or the one settled? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. If this gave you a way of seeing yourself you didn't have an hour ago, this channel exists entirely for moments like that one. Next time, we're going inside the exact 10 seconds where she decides if you're still performing or finally settled, and why she decides it before you've said a full sentence.